Your grandfather's tool is rusting through in the shed right now. You painted it 2 years ago. It didn't matter. Moisture got underneath anyway, and now it's worse than before you started. Meanwhile, an iron gate built in 1911 still swings clean on its hinges 100 miles from here. Cost to protect it, $2. Time, 1 afternoon. Stay with me. The first time I drove out to a hollow outside a small Blue Ridge farming community, I was looking for something else entirely. Old fence building methods. The kind of thing that never makes it into a hardware store manual. What I found instead was a woman named Ruth Caldwell, 81 years old, still working a garden behind a house her husband's family had farmed since the 1920s. Leaning against her tool shed was a hay rake older than she was, its handle worn smooth by decades of hands. No rust, not a speck, not even at the joints where you'd expect it worst. I asked her what she used. She didn't reach for a paint can. She reached for a coffee tin full of dark powder tucked on a shelf next to canning supplies and mixed it with water right there in front of me like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. I didn't understand what I was looking at until I started digging through old agricultural records afterward, county by county, looking for any mention of what she'd shown me. And when I found what I found, I understood exactly why nobody sells this to you anymore. If you'd rather know this than pay for it, subscribing keeps this knowledge coming. Here's what modern rust inhibitor paint actually does to your metal. It seals the surface completely, and that's the problem, not the solution. Any moisture that gets underneath through a scratch, a pinhole, a seam where two pieces of metal meet, gets trapped there with nowhere to go. It can't evaporate. It just sits there and keeps working on the metal from the inside, hidden under a coat of paint that looks perfectly fine from where you're standing. You end up with rust that's actually worse than if you'd done nothing at all, and you don't find out until the paint blisters and you're staring at a hole clean through the metal. The industry figured this out a long time ago and they built around it rather than fixing it. A 5-gallon bucket of rust inhibitor paint runs $40 to $60, and if it's doing its job the way most of it does, you're back at the hardware store in 2 to 3 years buying another bucket, then another after that. That's not a flaw in the product. That's the business model, working exactly as intended. But here's what the old farming families never did. They never tried to seal the metal off from the world and hope for the best. And it's the reason their tools, their gates, their well pumps are still working 100 years later, while ours fail in a fraction of that time, sitting in sheds all over this country right now. The powder Ruth Caldwell used was tannic acid, the same compound found naturally in oak bark and black tea, and it was a staple in rural tool sheds long before anyone was selling rust prevention in a can with a brand name on it. Mixed with water into a thin solution and brushed directly onto rusted metal, it doesn't cover the rust the way paint does. It reacts with it chemically on contact. Here's the plain version of the chemistry, no lab coat required. Rust is iron oxide and it's unstable. It keeps reacting with air and moisture, which is why it keeps spreading outward from wherever it starts, eating further into the metal every season. According to the general reference entry on rust converters, tannic acid chemically transforms the reddish iron oxide into a bluish-black compound called ferric tannate, which is far more stable and doesn't keep reacting with moisture the way raw rust does. That's the entire secret laid out in plain terms. It isn't folklore, it's a documented chemical reaction. Think of it like this. Paint tries to wrap the metal in plastic wrap and hope nothing ever gets underneath. Tannic acid changes the metal itself so there's nothing left for the moisture to attack in the first place. When I asked Ruth why she trusted it over anything from the store, she said it plainly. You don't fight rust, you finish it and then it's done fighting you. That's the part that stunned me, and it's the part most people miss the first time they hear it. It doesn't wear out the way paint does because it isn't sitting on top of the metal, it's part of it now down at the surface where the reaction happened. No reapplication every few years, no special tools, no compressor, no spray gun, no skill beyond a brush, a steady hand, and 20 minutes you already have. This is the difference between fighting a problem forever and ending it once. Paint fights, tannic acid finishes, and once you understand that distinction, you start noticing how many things in your shed, your barn, your garage have been maintained for years instead of actually fixed. Now here's why you've never heard this from a paint company, a hardware store employee, or a home improvement show, even though it's been sitting in plain sight the whole time. It's not a conspiracy, it's worse than that. A conspiracy you can fight because someone's hiding something specific and you can expose it. A system you cannot see is harder to fight because it just feels like the way things are, like there's no other option and never was. A recent industry market report valued the global paints and coatings market at nearly $220 billion in 2025, projected to climb past $330 billion within the decade, and a meaningful share of that growth is tied directly to renovation and maintenance demand, since well over a third of buildings in this country are more than 50 years old and constantly need recoating. The business isn't built on solving rust, it's built on rust coming back. A $2 powder that permanently ends the problem in one application doesn't get shelf space next to a coating that needs replacing every 36 months because there's no repeat business in a problem that's actually solved. It's not that tannic acid is some closely guarded secret, it's that nobody with anything to sell you benefits from you knowing it, so nobody tells you. Think about what that means for every can of rust paint you've ever bought. You weren't buying a fix, you were buying a delay, priced just right to bring you back in a few years for a problem that a coffee tin of powder could have ended permanently the first time. That's not bad luck. That's the model working exactly as designed on every shelf in every store for as long as most of us have been buying paint. Here's exactly how to do this yourself this weekend for under $2, no special trip required. Buy tannic acid powder sold in most hardware or brewing supply stores, sometimes labeled as rust converter base, and occasionally found in the leather tanning section since tanners have used the same compound for centuries. Mix 2 tablespoons into 1 cup of warm water until it's fully dissolved, stirring until you don't see any grit left at the bottom. Wire brush the rusted metal first to knock off any loose flaking, but don't worry about getting it perfectly clean. That's actually the point of this method, unlike paint, which needs a bare surface to bond. Brush the solution on generously, working it into pits and seams, and let it sit uncovered for 24 hours before touching it again. Here's what you'll notice week by week so you know it's working and aren't left guessing. By day 1, the rust darkens to a blue-black color right in front of you. That's the iron tannet forming as the reaction takes hold. By week 1, the surface is dry, matte, and stable with none of the orange bleeding through the way it would if you just painted over it. By week 2, you can apply a light coat of linseed oil over it if you want some shine back, though it isn't required for the protection to hold. By week 4, in most cases, there's no visible change at all because there's nothing left to change. That's the whole point of finishing the reaction instead of covering it up. Now here's the part I promised you at the start. In a county historical archive, in a box of old agricultural extension bulletins nobody had opened in years judging by the dust on the lid, there's a short pamphlet on metal preservation written by a farm extension agent working with families in that region. It doesn't use fancy language, and it doesn't read like something written to impress anybody or sell anybody anything. It reads like a man writing directly to his neighbors, telling them plainly what worked on their own farms and what was a waste of hard-earned money during years when nothing could be wasted. There's no branding on it, no product name, no price, no call to action, just observations, written down because they were true and worth passing along. Reading it, you understand this was never some hidden secret formula locked away in a vault somewhere, waiting to be discovered. It was simply common knowledge, passed farm to farm, neighbor to neighbor, the same way people once shared which fields flooded first or which well never ran dry. It stopped being shared, though, once it stopped being profitable for anyone to share it. Nobody erased it on purpose. It just quietly stopped getting repeated once there was money to be made in you forgetting it. And one generation later, it was gone from most kitchens and most sheds entirely. That's how knowledge like this disappears, not with a single decision, but with decades of silence where no one had a reason to speak up. Holding that pamphlet, you start to realize how much of what we call old-fashioned was actually just correct, and how much of what we call modern was simply more convenient to sell. That distinction matters because it changes how you look at everything else sitting on a store shelf claiming to be the only real solution to a problem your grandparents solved for pennies. I know what some of you are thinking, so let's deal with it directly instead of skipping past it, because you deserve real answers, not just reassurance. First, does this actually hold up outdoors in real weather over years, not just weeks in a controlled test somewhere? Ruth's Gate has been through decades of Appalachian winters, ice storms included, sitting exposed to everything the mountains can throw at it, and it's still standing. The chemistry itself doesn't degrade with sun or cold the way a paint film does over time because there's no film sitting on the surface waiting to crack. Second, my situation is different. My metal's already too far gone to bother trying. This method works on the rust you already have, however bad it looks. It doesn't require bare metal to start, which is exactly why it works so well on tools that have been neglected for years, sitting forgotten in the back of a shed. And third, if someone in your life insists paint is the only real proven solution, ask them one simple question: why does paint need reapplying every few years if it actually solved the problem the first time around? A real fix doesn't need repeating. And if you're still not sure, here's the one thing I'd ask you to try first, before you take my word for any of it. One small rusted tool, one quiet afternoon, $2 spent. Let it prove itself to you in your own shed, on your own metal, before you decide whether to trust anything else I've told you. You didn't lose this knowledge because it stopped working. It was taken from you slowly, one product placed on a shelf, one convenient paint store recommendation, one generation at a time, until reaching for a can just felt normal, instead of expensive and short-lived. There's a group of people, a lot of them our age, who are done being sold solutions to problems that never needed to exist in the first place, and who'd rather spend 20 minutes fixing something for good than $20 a year fixing it halfway. Tell me about the oldest rusted tool sitting in your shed right now, the one you've been meaning to deal with for longer than you'd like to admit. Next time we're heading into a root cellar built during the Depression, using a preservation trick that kept root vegetables fresh for 8 months without a single watt of electricity, I'll see you there.